could I interest you in a book review? Hello my friends, I hope you're doing well, and if we haven't met before, hi, I'm Charlemagne and I read tarot here on the internet. I also like to read actual books, a lot, and these are all of the books that I read in 2025. Okay, well actually these are all of the books that I read in 2025. I mean, actually, these are all of the books that I read in 2025. But these are the physical copies that I own of all of the spirituality and self-development related books that I read last year. But I wanted to go through all of the spirituality and self-development books that I read last year with you guys. I really wanted to talk about them. Yes, I understand that it's May of 2026, but it took me a while to collate everything. So we're going to talk about what all of these books are about, how I feel about them, my critiques, and what I would recommend. I figured we would do this in chronological order so you could experience the way that I experienced all of these books. And that means we'll be starting with the bottom of this stack, looking at the Cosmic Ordering Service by Barbel Mohr. Okay, let's talk about the Cosmic Ordering Service. Also, don't mind the nakedness of the shelves. It turns out we're having to move again. Yeah, it's complicated. I'll explain later. Actually, that's better. So I read this book at the beginning of last year, and I think it was the first book review that I posted on this channel as a short. I found this copy of the book in a little library on my walk home from the gym one evening. And the reason that I picked it up was because I remembered seeing the name Barbel Mohr before. It turns out that that was in reference to Noel Edmonds, a household name in the UK as a TV presenter, though you might recognise him from Deal or No Deal even if you don't live in the UK. But Noel is also known for being the guy that popularised the Cosmic Ordering Service in the British cultural space. Unfortunately, over time he has demonstrated himself to be somewhat woo-woo bananas? I quite like that one. I imagine I'll be coming back to it later. And if you want to know more about Noel Edmonds' history surrounding the sort of new age spiritual space, here is a YouTube video on the subject that I watched quite a while ago now, but that explained so much about why Noel Edmonds is like that. Anyway, this book is essentially just an anecdotal look at how modern manifestation practices function, and specifically it explains Barbel's approach to it, the Cosmic Ordering Service. In her words, and that's exactly how it works with the Cosmic Ordering Service too. You place your order, and the UPS, Universal Parcel Service, follows you around to deliver the order. But you, stubborn as usual, won't listen to your gut feelings. Why stairs? I always take the elevator. As in real life, the Universal Parcel Service will try to deliver the order again and again, as they want to get rid of these parcels too, you know. The more open you are, the more you trust, and the more you are who you are, the easier it will be for you to access and listen to your inner voice, and to disregard what others may think of you. Your most important questions are, what are my gut feelings? Do I really want this? Is that really me? Do I want to lounge on the sofa tonight instead of going to this terribly important dinner with these people? And even if I decide to go, can I be consciously happy about the fact that I decided to go when I don't have to do anything? With this in mind, you will become more sensitive, and when you get a call from the Cosmic Ordering Service to your gut, you'll follow it. For example, your gut may say something like this: get up an hour earlier today and go jogging, or take the stairs, or please head around the block on the first left this time and talk to the old man at the kiosk. He has a nice nephew who works at a company where your dream job will become available soon, but we won't tell you about that until 3 months from now. So I personally did not like the way that this book was laid out. It feels like your friend explaining to you their experience of something like they're an expert, when you know that they literally only watched like 2 TikToks and a YouTube video about it, and now they're acting like a guru. Apparently she's written a lot more books about the method since writing this one. Ones that are more in-depth, but this didn't really inspire further reading from me. Half of the book is autobiographical, and I found this okay, and the end half is mostly just inspirational quotes designed to get you into the mindset of manifesting. And this is actually where I find that the book falls down the most, because this method of manifestation is based in the beliefs of New Thought and Theosophy, which was a movement that got very popular in the 18 and early 1900s. And this belief system basically says that your mindset is the reason that bad things happen to you, and that if you don't think positively or somewhat deludedly, about your circumstances, any failure that you experience is your own fault. And I don't like that for several reasons. But I'm not actually going to get into all of those reasons now because this is actually going to come up later. I find that this book might be useful to somebody that needs to hear someone else's experience of manifestation, or is even just in need of some motivational quotes. But I personally couldn't recommend this because the book is too short, for one, which means that it doesn't really go into major amounts of detail and has some specific new thought and theosophy undertones that just don't sit right with me. 4 out of 10. Did not think I would be learning that much about Noel Edmonds. But this does mean that I can move on to the next book. So let's move on to The Monk's Guide to Happiness by gelong thubten. This isn't actually my copy of the book, it's my sister's. But this was the next book that I read because we lived together, so I pulled it off of the shelf and had a read. And I read this pretty much directly after I read The Cosmic Ordering Service. This book is a self-help guide from Gelong. A man that gave up his life of acting, partying, and general debauchery for monkhood in the early 2000s. He talks about his experience of being a monk, learning about Buddhism, and his experience with giving talks on meditation and mindfulness all over the world. I really enjoyed the biographical elements of this book because I've always been interested in how monks live and what the general vibe of life is like in the monastic setting. I think perhaps to a certain extent I've always associated monasteries with places that abusive people can go to get away with heinous acts. But I understand that they can't all be like that. But I think a lot of this book is just a reminder to people that things get hard sometimes. While this is definitely just an introductory text to a lot of the concepts that are described in here, and not a particularly dense read on the subject, it still expresses the attitude and mindset necessary to meditate effectively. From practical advice on how to sit, whether or not to close your eyes, and multiple mindfulness and meditative practices within the actual practice itself, not just these practical elements, to learning about how compassion and loving kindness are used in Buddhism to promote happiness. This guy gets it. Like, listen to these excerpts. I found that many people seek a kind of happiness which is a fleeting sensation, a high, an injection-like bolt of energy to the heart. Yet this never seems to last. And when they no longer experience that high, they crave it again. Or this one. A myth we have believed throughout our lives is that we have to get happiness. And if we can just get the external details of our lives right, we will be happy. This is not happiness. It is a form of enslavement. I think that this book is a very useful and gentle approach to many of these concepts. And I would definitely recommend this to anybody that doesn't know a lot about meditation, Buddhism, or the other practices and concepts that come alongside it. 8 out of 10. I could only wish to have missed the conception of Facebook in favor of chilling on a remote Scottish island with my homies. I think this next one we probably need to go outside for, so I will meet you there. It seems oddly typical for me that it decides to rain just when I decide to come outside. But the reason that I wanted to take a walk for this segment wasn't just because I wanted to go out into the woods, which are obviously very beautiful and a delight to be in, but also because I wanted to talk about the book Breath by James Nestor. I don't know if you can see, but where it's been raining, the air is a lot cooler than the rest of the ground around it, so you can see my breath coming out of my mouth as I'm walking. Now, this actually counts as my first library checkout in this list. And I believe it's also the first audiobook because I listen to audiobooks while I'm doing cardio in the gym. And when I saw that it was available, it felt oddly appropriate given the setting. Potentially also kind of a mistake because I found myself being very aware of my breathing while I was dying during my incline walks on the treadmill at the time. But we live and we learn. So this book is essentially a culmination of all of the research done by author James Nestor when he was initially getting into breath work and meditation for some of the mental and physical ailments that he was experiencing at the time. I learnt a lot about how breathing and the respiratory system works whilst reading this book, but also a lot about how other systems of the body work in tandem with the respiratory system. I also learnt a lot about prehistory and historical diets and practices that I never would have known if I have not read this book. It was genuinely quite fascinating. And those topics were in direct relation to the way that we breathe now and how it differs from our historical counterparts. Like, he talks a lot about how people tend to get sicker nowadays because of how narrow our palates have become, the hard bit on the top of your mouth, and how that is directly related to the fact that our diets are a lot softer, like physically, than our historical counterparts. And that this subtle change in the way that we eat has directly affected the way that our mouths develop, and the rest of our olfactory system as a consequence. He also specifically talks about how we aren't breathing the way that our ancestors were. We are not breathing anywhere near as slowly or as deeply as they did, for a variety of reasons, including the one about the palate, but that we could see massive health improvements by just simply breathing more deeply and taking the time to acknowledge the way that we breathe. You could see why I would be getting a lot of awareness around the way that I was breathing while reading this. In fact, the main thing that I took away from this was that the reduction in breath rate is enough to see improvements in our overall health, not just in terms of our respiratory systems, but in terms of everywhere in our bodies. Let me find somewhere to sit and I'll read the quote to you, actually. Oh, that's a good log. Yeah, let's use that one. Look at that. Delightful. It turns out that while breathing at a normal rate, our lungs will absorb only about a quarter of the available oxygen in the air. The majority of that oxygen is exhaled back out. By taking longer breaths, we allow our lungs to soak up more in fewer breaths. Bachman explains that overbreathing can have other, deeper effects on the body beyond just lung function and constricted airways. When we breathe too much, we expel too much carbon dioxide, and our blood pH rises to become far more alkaline. When we breathe slower and hold in more carbon dioxide, pH lowers and blood becomes more acidic. Almost all cellular functions in the body take place at a blood pH level of 7.4, a sweet spot between alkaline and acidic. Oh, and the nasal breathing. We cannot forget the nasal breathing. Here's another quote. When the nasal cavity gets congested, airflow decreases and bacteria flourishes. These bacteria replicate and can lead to infection and colds and more congestion. Congestion begets congestion, which gives us no other option but to habitually breathe from the mouth. Yeah, mouth breathing isn't just a way to say that somebody's stupid, apparently. It's actually like really, really bad for you. Oh, I have to be quite careful of the logs here while I'm coming out of this little break in the trees. But yeah, I found out from this book that you are actually supposed to breathe out of your nose like 99% of the time, unless it's like literally impossible. And that if you're breathing out of your mouth more than you're breathing out of your nose, then you might have some problems, perhaps. I actually considered this book to be on my spiritual list based on the fact that there's a lot of emphasis on the way that breath is used in early spiritual practices. Yoga, meditation, and witchcraft from all over the world always seem to incorporate it as part of their practice. They also all have some kind of thought as to how breath is directly connected to the divine or life energy of the body. And Nestor goes into a lot of detail about how these specific beliefs and practices likely stem from the observable health benefits that people were seeing, things that now we can scientifically measure. I would actually highly recommend this book, like especially if you have difficulty with your breathing and you're not sure what's causing it. Because some of the stuff that I read in here, I've like never really heard outside of that book. And there are things that I've actively implemented in my day-to-day life that have ended up being really, really beneficial. Particularly the nasal breathing, but also reducing breath rate and chewing on crunchier things as much as my gums hate it. That being said, and considering that I've seen direct benefits from this, 9 out of 10. There are definitely some things that I would still classify as woo-woo bananas, but the overarching message is still very, very strong and very, very compelling. Also, I do recommend trying to breathe at 5.5 breaths per minute. It's weird, but good. Maybe don't listen to this whilst puffing and panting on a treadmill. That just makes you self-conscious. It's not worth it. I also think in this particular list, this book is the type that reminds me that some sciencey people do look at practices from our ancestors and go, I wonder what benefit this was serving the people, rather than saying, wow, this is dumb because I don't understand it. Okay, now that my walk has been achieved, I'm gonna go grab a coffee and we'll head back home and talk about the next book on the list. Turns out I didn't even have to get coffee myself because my husband wanted to come and bring me a coffee. So he came and met me after I was finished filming outside. It tastes like love and admiration. Okay, let's talk about The Creative Act by Rick Rubin. Oscar Wilde said that some things are too important to be taken seriously. Art is one of those things. Setting the bar low, especially to get started, frees you to play, explore, and test without the attachment to results. When I finally find a physical copy of this secondhand, I will buy it on site. No questions. Rick Rubin, legendary executive and producer, responsible for some of the most influential albums of all time, comes out with a book, and it's all about the act of creation. But it's not just a book about creating things, because that would be more like a memoir than anything else. It is a book about how philosophically to go about creating things, and I really enjoyed my time with it. I reserved this as an audiobook from the library because it was still being... Fuck. That's the third time I've done that with this lid. Let's see if that helps. So I reserved this as an audiobook from the library as opposed to just buying a copy of it outright straight away, because I knew that the audiobook was also narrated by Rick Rubin. And there's something about hearing a book from the author's mouth that gives it just a completely different feel. I also had a feeling that this was something that I was going to really want a physical copy of in the future, and like, boy was I correct. Weirdly, if you're a creative yourself, then there's a very high likelihood that some of the stuff that he says in this book is stuff you kind of already know. Most of the things that he says in this book are very obvious. But I think if you're actively spending time with this book, you kind of realize that that's what it's for. Unusually for me, I actually ended up reading some of the reviews of this book on Goodreads before finishing the book. And I noticed that a lot of people were giving it quite negative reviews. Some people saying it read like a quote book, or my personal favorite of man takes LSD and experiences emotions for the first time. Which I can appreciate for the people that were expecting something more profound or intellectual out of the old white man, but from my lived experience, I would not expect something out of old white men, to be perfectly honest. Like, yeah, it's kind of trying to be a Buddhist text, but I'm also into those, so you've kind of got me cornered there. Like, listen to this. If you have an idea you're excited about, and you don't bring it to life, it's not uncommon for the idea to find its voice through another maker. This isn't because the other artist stole your idea, but because the idea's time has come. It's not new. It's not fresh. It's not even particularly profound, but I would argue that this book is designed to be a canvas, one that you scrawl and scribble all over. You annotate, you contemplate, and with the information that you gain from those things, you go on to create something beautiful. And I think that is how many people do their best creating. This book is the narrative equivalent of standing on the shoulders of giants, or standing on the shoulders of people standing on the shoulders of giants. So my personal recommendation with this book is to get a physical copy if you can. But I do think that the audiobook gives you the information to chew on, even if it doesn't allow you to work through the ideas presented in a more tangible way. I would give this a 7 out of 10. Go and read an actual philosophy book if that's what you're looking for, but don't expect that out of the guy that produced Run DMC and Public Enemy. Like, I just don't really get what you wanted. So now, having finished my coffee, I'm going to make the executive decision to take a break in between reviews and do my hair, because I have been itching to do something to it. And I promised myself that I would work on this video at least a little bit before doing my hair, so if I come back with a completely different haircut, that's why. But it needs to be done. These roots aren't it. So I will be back later to talk about the next book. Okay, so full disclosure, I may not have filmed for a couple of days because I felt unwell after filming that last segment. And now we're in the middle of a heat wave, the first one of the year, what joy! Which means it's exceptionally early, for me at least. It is currently 8:40 in the morning because it's the only time of the day where I don't feel like I'm going to die. So I'm gonna make my breakfast and then we're gonna talk about the next book, The Cosmic Serpent by Jeremy Narby. Do you guys like my hair, by the way? Mind you, these are like day-old curls already, and I've had to wash my hair twice because I've been so sweaty. So sweaty. You can see the sheen on my forehead right now. Also, excuse my sniffles. My hay fever has been insane. Right, let's talk about The Cosmic Serpent. This copy of the book is on loan from a friend of mine who recommended it to me. I know it wasn't on the stack at the beginning, and that is because apparently it was in my sister's car because we have both managed to forget to give it back to said friend. The ADHD is rampant in this house. Don't worry, I will be giving it back to them. And yeah, I'll be honest, this book kind of lives in my head rent-free. So Jeremy Narby is an anthropologist who really wants to know what's going on with indigenous mythology. But early 1990s academia really didn't want that. They really didn't like what he was trying to say, so he put all of his research into this book instead. The book covers a lot, admittedly, but the main thing is what he learns when he spends time with an Amazonian tribe, studying the practices of ayahuasqueros or tobaqueros, practitioners of the shamanic art of getting high and talking to the divine. While Narby is initially doing this study for his degree, he is very curious about the connection between the folklore of many of these indigenous regions and the imagery of biology. Namely, in that it's really weird that we keep seeing the same patterns and ideas within the mythology first and then the sciences. Like how in biology we will discover a concept or a construct of the body, which is then immediately reflected in the imagery from these particular belief systems and within these mythologies. As the name of the book implies, he seems particularly fascinated by the idea of our knowledge of DNA before we get even close to gene sequencing, or even germ theory.
All the peoples of the world who talk of a cosmic serpent have been saying as much for millennia. He has not seen it because the rational gaze is forever focalized and can examine only one thing at a time. It separates things to understand them, including the truly complementary. It's the gaze of the specialist who sees the fine grain of a necessarily restrictive field of vision. One, Western culture has cut itself off from the serpent life principle, in other words DNA, since it adopted an exclusively rational point of view. Two, the people who practice what we call shamanism communicate with DNA. Three, paradoxically, the part of humanity that cut itself off from the serpent managed to discover its material existence in a laboratory somewhere 3,000 years later.
Basically, we seem to be able to access knowledge, specifically the knowledge within our own DNA, through natural means, not just man-made ones. And that because DNA is so closely linked to every living creature on Earth, that we can then discover things about other living things through this internal knowledge. Some of the things that are talked about in this book are used to try and prove the hypothesis that all living beings are even more interconnected than anything that we could have possibly imagined using the scientific model. I would honestly describe this book as being an ode to the holistic method in combination with the modern sciences.
Shamanism resembles an academic discipline, such as anthropology or molecular biology. With its practitioners, fundamental researchers, specialists, and schools of thought, it is a way of apprehending the world that evolves constantly. One thing is certain, both indigenous and mestizo shamans consider people like the Shipibo Conibo, the Tucano, the Kamsa, and the Huitoto as the equivalent to universities such as Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, or the Sorbonne. They are the highest reference in matters of knowledge. In this sense, ayahuasca-based shamanism is an essentially indigenous phenomenon. It belongs to the indigenous people of the Western Amazonia, who hold the keys to a way of knowing that they have practiced without interruption for at least 5,000 years. In comparison, the universities of the Western world are less than 900 years old.
I want to point out that this book is like half book and half footnote. I kind of assumed that this was a bid by Narby to not ramble throughout the actual prose of the book, but by God, is this dense. Honestly, reading this whole thing required a curiosity and an interest in the subject matter that not everybody is going to have, I'm going to be honest. But if you're a practitioner of holistic means, natural arts, and you personally see a lot of the gaps in our scientific understanding that come from the fact that we refuse to acknowledge these holistic methods in the sciences, based on the fact that we have no instruments to measure a lot of these things, then a lot of the things that Narby says in this book are going to ring very true for you. And there's something about the way that he speaks about these things that conveys his excitement and interest in it. That it is really nice to see people that exist in the modern scientific world actively acknowledging and documenting indigenous knowledge. It might not be perfect, and to be fair, it does also suffer with 20th century academic speak. that might make it a little bit difficult to understand for some. Like, look, we can't blame the white man for being a white man. This book was written in 1995 and it really shows in the language as well as in some of the information. He seemed to be under the impression that plants don't talk to each other. But like, obviously, it's 2026 and we have a lot of research into how plant life have interconnected root networks under the ground now. So yeah, like 30 years changes a lot in our understanding. I'll actually read you the quote because it feels really funny from the modern standpoint. Perhaps the most revealing example in this respect is provided by Luis Eduardo Luna, the author of an excellent study on the shamanism of the Medzito Ayusqueros of the Peruvian Amazon, who practice what they call vegetalismo, a form of popular medicine based on hallucinogenic plants, singing, and dieting. He writes, "They say that the ayahuasca is a doctor. It possesses a strong spirit and is considered an intelligent being with which it is possible to acquire knowledge and power if the diet and other prescriptions are carefully followed." Luna, who explores the question of plant teachers over several pages, ends up concluding, nothing can be said until we have some kind of understanding of what these people are really talking about when they say that the plants themselves reveal their properties. One cannot consider what they say is real because in reality as we know it, plants don't communicate. Reality is fickle, isn't it? Honestly, if you are interested in the connections between our modern sciences and indigenous knowledge, this is kind of a good book to start with, I think. Depending on the angle you want to come at it will be between this and Braiding Sweetgrass, which I have not read yet, but I have heard good things about. But yeah, if you are willing to read a book that is like 50% footnote, this is definitely worth looking into. It's such a good jumping off point for the thought process around connecting indigenous knowledge to the sciences as we understand them today. I'm going to give this book an 8 out of 10. I've referenced it in multiple conversations at this point. It has genuinely changed the way that I think about how we transfer information to each other through mythology and folklore. And it is weird how solidly this book has wedged itself into my brain. Okay, I'm finding it a little bit difficult to eat and talk at the same time, so I'm gonna finish up my food and then we will talk about the next book. I used to believe that love was something soft, a weak thing. You might believe that too. As a boy growing up in the Irish countryside, I didn't use the word love that often. Not with my family, not with my friends, not even with my first girlfriends. You're great, you're cool, I like you, you know. But I love you, the actual L-bomb? No, you must be mad. To be honest, I think I was afraid of love. I was afraid to let it out. Okay, we have moved to the floor because the temperature just went up significantly where the sun is finally like up in the sky properly. And a wave of nausea hit me after finishing my food. So keeping myself as close to the floorboards as possible. So this entry in the list is The Truth About Love by Conor Creighton, who is a man that looks exactly like his name. I read this during a particularly frustrating part of last year, and I think that the subject matter kind of put some things into perspective for me. Another library loan, because support your local library. Libraries are the heart of the community. And also another audiobook, because I run out of things to occupy my cardio time. You do kind of realize very quickly how desolate 3.5 hours a week ends up being if you don't have anything else to do with your brain. Anyway, this book gave me a lot of perspective on the difficulties with communication in relationships. And I suppose expectation in relationships that just makes everything harder for everyone. I feel that Creighton is specifically being a teacher first in this book, though his background is in journalism. But you can tell that he's very well read and well researched on the subject material. I think it was very insightful, and everything that he was talking about was based on his own personal experience throughout his life. And many of the things that he talks about are situations that anyone could find themselves in. This book does kind of act as a means of getting people into meditation, similar to A Monk's Guide to Happiness from earlier in the video, but it's doing it on a more like grassroots level. It's trying to introduce these concepts to the layman, to the average person, and applying them to a life that is outside the monastic setting. And you would think a book called The Truth About Love would be particularly romantically inclined, but it actually takes the concept of love in a more neutral sense, in a more broad sense, and in my opinion, a far more accurate sense, and shows us how it applies to our wider life. discussing how the expression of love is affected by our own hang-ups and difficulties and how that follows us into our other relationships. It includes our romantic and sexual relationships, but it also covers platonic, professional, familial. It's written from the angle of developing more mindful and intentional relationships, using techniques and information from a bunch of different practices. And I kind of found that to be the best part of the book. When someone makes the effort to look into something and to share that information more widely, to help improve the world by improving themselves and improving other people's lives with that information, that's the kind of thing I'm into. And that's what I do here with Charming Moon, on this channel, on my Patreon, with my work as a diviner. And that's a lot of what I seek out in media and in other people. Perfectionism is not love. Perfectionism is self-hate in sheep's clothing. Love everyone, said an old Indian guru, starting with you. Love is radical. I read this at a similar time to reading James O'Brien's How to Be Right and How Not to Be Wrong, which kind of cover how we are manipulated and influenced by not only our peers, but also by the media to believe certain things about other people and the world around us. And importantly, how to critically think about the whys and hows of what we are being told by people. James O'Brien is also a journalist by trade and a radio host. And I think in my mind, I kind of correlate all of these books as observations from people that talk to people for a living. And I don't even mean that in a bad way, because it's very important to hear a more collated view of opinion. It can be so easy to get locked into an echo chamber of people that all think the same thing. And I think that in reading The Truth About Love, it reminded me to acknowledge the experiences and the opinions of those that differ from my own. Not necessarily to agree, but to take them into consideration, much like I would any of the material that I ingest. Conversation, written literature, or otherwise. I don't necessarily know if I would recommend it or not, but I did enjoy my reading of it while I did, so let's say yes, I would recommend this book. I would also give it a 6 out of 10. I like the sentiment of this book more than I like the sentiment of James O'Brien's duology. Creighton has a very gentle narrative voice, and it really suits the material here. It does read a little bit too close to a Live, Laugh, Love mum or Trip to India young adult for me. We have Spiritual Awakening at home, thanks. Having said all I need to say about that, I have felt absolutely nauseated for this whole take. So I think I'm gonna go and have a lay down, and we can reconvene and talk about the next book. I will see you then. Self-love is the balance between accepting yourself as you are while knowing that you deserve better and working towards it. What's up? Yeah, so that lie down turned into like 4 days of me having to do a bunch of other stuff, including going and looking at potential new houses to live in and editing all of the other footage that I had for this video. I was actually going to film this section in the garden, but my hay fever has been so bad that even standing outside right now is making me sneeze. So that seemed like a bit of a bad idea. So I've kind of set myself up in front of my mostly packed away shelves, as you can see. Oh, I didn't actually update you guys on why I'm having to move house, even though I moved literally like 5 months ago. Yeah, so long story short, the rights for renters changed in the UK on the 1st of May. So my landlord, in their infinite wisdom, moved up our house inspection date from May to April. And when we told them about all of the things that have been wrong with the house since we got here, instead of resolving those issues, they just gave us an eviction notice 4 days before it would become illegal to do so. Yeah, I am just as mad as you are about it. So instead of staying in a house with a landlord that doesn't want us here, we're just gonna move out. Anyway, let's talk about some books. And we are moving on to Good Vibes, Good Life by Vex King. So I got a copy of this along with its sequel, which I will be talking about later, because I saw lots of pretty black women reading it on the train and I wanted to know what was up. I just wanted to know what they were reading. So I bought a copy of this along with its sequel, Healing is the New High, from A Lady on Vinted. If you are in the UK or the US, I do highly recommend using Vinted as a source for used books. It helps out a real person directly with not only getting rid of their old stuff, but also giving them a bit of cash. And generally, you can get a pretty untouched version of the book that you wanted. A win-win for everyone. So the author, Vex King, is a social media presence and life coach. I actually forget if he refers to himself as that or not. Oh, wait, mind coach. It was mind coach. For the most part, he is just a guy sharing his experience with struggle and pain, and his process of healing after years of self-hatred and toxicity. The language is fairly simple, the advice is very clear, and the sentiment is incredibly supportive, with a lot of anecdotes from not only King's life, dealing with the death of his father, experiencing homelessness at a young age, experiencing abuse, discrimination, but also his experiences with his clients as a mind coach. I apologize if I sound incredibly unserious every time I say mind coach, but the term is just so funny to me. It tickles me. I don't know why. Comparison is one of the most common reasons we experience sadness. I admit that comparison has stolen my joy on many occasions. I got to the stage where I was often embarrassed by my life because it wasn't as attractive as the lives of those around me. I remember during school, I'd rarely invite my friends to my house because I felt embarrassed by its size and condition. The aim of Good Vibes, Good Life is essentially just to introduce more joy and positive energy into your life, specifically by addressing the sources of negative energy that you have and healing from them, or setting boundaries if the issue isn't necessarily as resolvable as just healing. Many of the techniques that are shared are things that are used in therapeutic settings, as well as in practices like yoga and other meditative practices. If you can hear a lot of buzzing, I think that's because a bee has just gotten stuck by my window. Give me a second. My friend, you are not supposed to be in here. You gotta lower yourself down, bud. There you go. Sometimes you gotta help the bugs live their lives. The power of love and kindness is enormous, and sharing it with others can transform the world. But we must also be kind and loving towards ourselves. Instead of trying to change who you are, start giving yourself permission to feel good. Transform your own world, and you'll hone the skills needed to change the world around you. I definitely understand why Black women would gravitate towards this kind of book. There's been a big shift as of late in the social spaces of women of colour, where we are specifically looking for a softer, more healed lifestyle, specifically one that deviates from the sort of lives that we've been forced to lead as a marginalized community. And this book, written by a fellow person of color, albeit a man, that tells you that it's not only possible, but there are very practical means to get there, is very appealing to a group of people that want to break the cycle of neglect and abuse. And honestly, if you're not familiar with a lot of therapeutic and meditative topics, this is probably worth a read. And I would actually recommend this, especially if you are a person of color. There is a particular flavor of violence and harm that comes with being a brown person on the planet. And I think if you're not used to thinking about it that way, this book is a very gentle introduction to that. And this gives you room to dig deeper afterwards. I think I would give this book a 7 out of 10. I know it's supposed to be simple, but I did want more from it. Though I think that's more of a problem with me and less of a problem to do with Vex King. He seems fine. But I think a lot of people would benefit from the supportiveness of his approach. And some of my qualms with it will actually be addressed in the sequel, so we will get back to that later. While I am here, we're also going to talk about another book, one that I have been itching to talk about, and that is Soulmates and Twin Flames by Elizabeth Clare Prophet. If the twin flame relationship is not going to serve a spiritual purpose, if its re-establishment in this life is going to mean breaking up of families and homes, if it's going to cause a cataclysm in people's lives because they are in different situations that they are bound to be involved with, because they are resolving past karma, then often the outer mind would rather not deal with what the soul knows at the subconscious level. Oh boy, do I have thoughts about this book. This was another vintage find, and it was very strange because I happened to buy this at the same moment that the seller was packing up a bunch of books to send, so it felt quite fated that I was going to get this copy of the book. Anyway, this was a research read for me, because I was looking for the origin point of the modern concept of twin flames. I am going to be making a longer form video about this, so I'm not actually going to go into too much detail about the origins here. But this is the book that most people consider to be the turning point. This is where in neo-spiritual spaces we stop thinking about just soulmates sort of generically as a concept, and we start getting distinct twin flame lore. Now, generally, I would not beef with anybody's beliefs directly, but I will if I think it causes direct harm to others. And I do think that the logic of this book can directly cause harm to others if they buy into it completely. So yeah, I have some problems. I'll start with the main problem that I have with this book as a book, and that is mostly that it relies on the assumption that you've read some of Prophet's other books before this, as well as assuming that you're somewhat informed on theosophy and New Thought literature. Luckily, I've been looking into this for a while, but if I had not, I would not have understood a lot of the reasoning in this book. Like, she regularly uses concepts and terminology that are widely unfamiliar to anybody outside of this community. But for some reason, she still feels the need to explain what chakras are, but not the first time she mentions it. Only the second time. Unless a book is part of a series, that's just like poor form on the part of the writer. And now let's talk about my problem with this book as a guidance text. Like, ideologically, my issue with it. And that is she just straight up promotes things that have caused harm to people that take it to its logical extreme. I implore you to go and watch the Escaping Twins Flame documentary on Netflix. If you don't believe me, though to be honest, there's more than enough isolated stories about this causing problems. In this book, she explains how twin flames come to be, and how we would have these relationships and just be happy all the time if we just became Christian, I guess? Our early life on Earth was blissful, and we would each have continued to share the beauty of the relationship of cosmic lovers with our twin flames throughout our many incarnations, if we had remained in harmony with each other and with God. Ultimately, each and every one of us must learn to change the negative patterns, the base metal of the human ego, into the gold of our divine or real self. So there's a lot of use of the word karma in this book, which is not a belief from Christianity, believe it or not, but from Eastern faiths, like Hinduism and Buddhism. I mean, the concept of past lives and reincarnation isn't native to Christianity either, but it's being used here. But I do think that that's quite demonstrative of the leaps in logic that are required by this book to try and make sense of itself, to try and make the beliefs and ideas that it's presenting make sense. There is this very pervasive idea that your life will be very chaotic with your twin flame in it, because it's such a strong connection and you must somehow submit to it. And that fundamentally feels like a trap to me. Like, a soulmate is one thing, somebody that you inherently harmonize and resonate with on a spiritual level, and therefore you are naturally attracted to one another. But much of the twin flame rhetoric promotes the fact that you are intrinsically part of someone else, and that your avoidance of that relationship is inherently a problem because you aren't facing your demons or improving yourself, and that just seems like a recipe for abusive relationships to me. I don't know about you, but to me it feels like that. And that's not to mention that within a decade of this book being published, Clare turns her church into a doomsday cult really, really fast. Overall, I was left feeling incredibly icky with this book and could not recommend it to anybody. For me, it feels pretty obvious that this is a belief system that is not built for its practitioners and simply built for its leader. And if you're familiar with tactics like this in religious and spiritual spaces, you'll recognize immediately that somebody that might be feeling a little bit lost within their faith or ungrounded in some way might mistake a book like this as a sign from some higher power. 2 out of 10 should only be used as a reference text for the very problematic concept of twin flames. I also really need people to stop talking to the Ascended Masters if they're just going to use their teachings to start cults. I don't know if you can tell, but talking about that book kind of upset me. So I'm going to take a breather, and then I will come back and we will talk about the last 2 books together. I'll see you then. I should also put these back with the other books, you know. Don't put it down, put it away. See you in a bit. Humility is my table, respect is my garment, empathy is my food, and curiosity is my drink. As for love, it has 1,000 names, and is by my side at every window. Hello again. In the time between takes, it has been raining very, very consistently outside. So when I said that I was going to go and cool off, I didn't realize I meant it literally. But we're in the final stretch now. We're going to be talking about the last 2 books on my list. Starting with A Penguin Introduction to Islam by Tariq Ramadan. I thought it would be nice to sit here with the globe that is currently aptly pointed at the Levant. That's where Palestine is, by the way. So I found the copy of this book that I read in a stack of books that was just casually sitting outside of somebody's house on their front wall. It was fated, I swear. And I think that this book did a very good job in explaining the history and context of Islamic faith in the modern world, as well as the common misconceptions that surround Islam in the West. I've always been fascinated by Islamic faith and practice, as I grew up with many Muslim friends and classmates, and that's what happens when you grow up in the most multicultural area in the country. So while Islam is something that I have a basic understanding of due to sheer osmosis, I didn't really have a lot of academic knowledge about the subject, and I did want to dig deeper into it, so this book came at just the right time. The book explains and details the life of Muhammad the Prophet, peace be upon him, the creation of the Quran and Hadith, the schism that happened in the community after Muhammad's death that led to the creation of two key factions, Shia and Sunni Islam, and the main principles and laws that Muslims follow and abide today. The writing of this book can be a little dense. I would show you the copy of the book that I had, but unfortunately it did end up in a donation pile just before we moved here by accident, so I don't actually have it anymore. But this is what it looks like. But I kind of understood why as soon as I got to my first runaway sentence.
There is no single definition of civilization, but we can agree that all civilizations contain common characteristics of an intellectual, artistic, social, institutional, and even economic nature. From this perspective, Islam is indeed a civilization whose references and distinguishing features cut across eras and cultures. The social, intellectual, and artistic life that flourished under the Umayyads found an echo in the golden age of the Abbasids, which in turn would resonate not only amongst the Ottomans, but also in the particular genius of African, Persian, and Asian cultures, extending into Europe through Andalusia and beyond.
Tariq Ramadan is a scholar of his faith, and a very dedicated one at that. And it's really hard to condense something that you know so much about into a book that's less than 400 pages.
In Muslim-majority societies and elsewhere, the guiding principle must be respect for the dignity of human beings, even though we may disagree with their actions. Such must be the fundamental rule with respect to our fellow human beings, to their consciences and their conduct, through respect through all of their dignity while remaining free to judge the act without condemning the person.
This guy loves being Muslim, and he loves teaching people about Islam. And I can't fault him for it. I do the same thing here with tarot. The only thing that really bothered me about this book, other than the very aggressive runaway sentences, was that Ramadan claims not to be an apologist, but bro does not do a good job of owning up to some of the messed up stuff that people have done in the name of Islam. I do agree with him that, much in the way of Christianity and Judaism, many people deliberately misinterpret and bend the rules of their faith in order to get away with heinous shit for their own benefit. And it's a very difficult thing to try and reconcile some of the more archaic practices of your faith in a modern setting with modern principles. You would think that I was talking about the typical Sharia law stuff where people were cutting off the hands of thieves, but I'm actually talking about the mistreatment of women and children and queer people in that cultural context.
Much has been written over the centuries about the status of the wife, the mother, or the daughter, but not a single serious work exists that speaks of women as a woman, a fully realized being and a free and objective actor who lives her spiritual life and experiences her emancipation and her inner growth and development as a woman. Doing evil or committing a sin has never been a cause for anyone to cease being a Muslim. Even though homosexuality is considered a sin, no person has the right to excommunicate a homosexual.
Yeah, it's kind of fucked up.
I do want to clarify here that Ramadan in no way condones any of the heinous behavior that has been committed towards these marginalized communities in this book. In fact, he actively condemns the treatment of women and gay people and children across the board in this book. The problem that I was having is that it's very narratively jarring for him to flip-flop between, well, that's not real Islam, because that's not what the text says, and it needs to be treated with more nuance, and then also fundamentally agreeing with them still because it's part of the Muslim faith. That was the only thing that I really noticed while reading.
The explanations and considerations of these things, though, are incredibly well thought out. And these well-measured explanations very concisely explain how Islam is practiced today, and in many ways really demonstrate how Islam as a faith is dedicated to the pursuit of spiritual knowledge. I would recommend this to anybody that wants to learn more about the history and practices of Islam, especially if you know nothing about it. This was such a good entry point and explains everything so concisely, in spite of the density of the text. And I think taking all of that into consideration, I would give this book an 8 out of 10. Inshallah, people go and read about Islam and realize that it's not a cult. Okay, last one. Why did I choose to have the tea in my hand? Let's talk about Healing is the New High by Vex King. I told you we'd get back to the sequel. I don't even know if you can see the cover of this properly on camera because it's so shiny. I actually just finished this book, which is why I started making this video in the first place. Yes, I understand that we're in 2026 now, but I started this in December of 2025, so forgive me. Following up from his first book, Good Vibes, Good Life, Vex King uses this book to demonstrate a method of reprogramming and ultimately healing the mind from limiting beliefs, using the yogic concept of the 7 subtle bodies as a framework of sorts. What are the 7 subtle bodies, you ask? Well, in yoga, the self is split up into 7 different bodies. The etheric body, or the nervous system, the emotional body, the mental body, the astral body, which connects the spiritual to the physical, the etheric template, where the spiritual effective things happens, the celestial body that interacts with the divine, and the casual body, or the all-encompassing self. These are also the bodies that we connect to when we are looking at the 7 chakra points inside our physical bodies. It's all very interconnected, you know. King uses this structure to help walk you through the method of acknowledging, identifying, and reprogramming these beliefs that you might have acquired throughout your life in order to help heal past traumas, to develop less reactive behaviors, to address recurring difficulties, and overall, to just feel better within ourselves. Listen to this quote on trauma from the book. One thing I know about trauma is that it distorts and intensifies every negative thought, feeling, physical sensation, and so on that we have. Trauma is like being covered with open wounds and wading into the ocean. A person who is whole and healed will very likely experience a positive sensation, especially if the water's warm and inviting and they love the ocean. However, someone who's experiencing trauma will immediately feel pain as the salt water burns each wound. Trauma makes us thin-skinned, overly sensitive, hypervigilant, and prone to pain. It is often all-encompassing too, so our attention is focused on the pain and on desperately trying to avoid more of it. This is kind of what I wanted out of the first book, I think. And I've certainly enjoyed this one a lot more than I did the first one. The system that's being used in this book is both tried and true and also new and refreshing. And the practices and exercises suggested for each section of the book are very well informed and well thought through. The writing style also still maintains that very kind and gentle approach that I really enjoyed from the first book, but with added depth and specificity. Again, I definitely understand what all of the pretty black ladies were getting from this when they were reading it on the train. The support oozes from every chapter. I hope you take strength and positivity from these pages, and confidence. I hope you feel more confident that you can and you are recovering. Heal. Feel your own power. I completely believe that you can and are healing. People who accept themselves can accept others, and that can change the world. Thank you for being here. I truly appreciate your commitment to these pages. I think sometimes you just need someone to tell you you're doing a good job. And that's what this book is doing. I do think that this book still suffers with being a layman's guide to getting your shit together, but I also think that it's doing it really, really well. And it's doing it really well for the communities that need that support and guidance, and I couldn't ask for anything more than that, to be honest. I would say, same as last time, this is a very good starting point, but it's really worth getting into the sources that Vex references if you want to get deeper into the philosophies and concepts that are being spoken about in the book. But there is nothing wrong with just doing the motion and finding success in the process by itself. This is definitely the book that I would recommend over Good Vibes, Good Life, and definitely my better experience so far with Vex King as an author. I'm gonna give this a 9 out of 10, like an upgraded version of the first book. And with that, we are done. That is all of the books that I read in 2025. That was so many books. This video is going to be so long. If you are interested in any of these books and fancy giving them a read, then I have left a list of them in the description. And if you have any good book recommendations from your 2025 reading list, or even your 2026 one, then please leave them in the comments. I do read a lot and I am not afraid of having a TBR list that's like 1,000 books long. Like if you like the videos, subscribe if you want to see more. You can follow me on my other social media. It's all at Charming Moonco. And that can include becoming a member on Patreon if you like. You can buy a tarot reading from me on there. I teach people how to read tarot on there. I share tarot and spiritual resources, not only from myself, but also from other creators on there. And I sometimes share behind the scene content on what's going on with me sometimes, which also includes my How to Tarot guide if you're interested, over 100 pages on how to read tarot for a beginner. Chitty! There's a lot going on there, and you can join as a free member and you still get stuff, so it's worth having a look. Chili, you gotta stop. Stop it. I will definitely be back with another video, hopefully sooner rather than later. But until then, stay blessed, my friend.